A very big welcome to everyone joining us for the very first installment of our new podcast, 30 Minutes at Mamba Milan, a podcast where we intend to bring you stimulating discussions on the intersectionality between law, business, and current affairs. We're ecstatic to launch our podcast with a discussion on the 2025 risk outlook. I have the tremendous pleasure and honor of having Mr. Mutisunge Zulu, a leading expert in risk, an alumni from Harvard and Manchester University, joining us to discuss his insights and share his experience on our risk outlook for 2025. So, welcome, Mr. Zulu.
Thank you, and thanks for hosting me.
Pleasure. All right. Okay. Getting into it, before we get into the meat of our discussion, I'd like to just get to know you briefly. Talk to me about your background. Where were you born? Where'd you go to school? And then we can talk about your background in risk.
Okay, thank you so much. So, Mutisunge Zulu is my name. I was born in Livingston. I went to school here in Zambia. Been to the Copperbelt University. I did my MBA at Manchester, and then I did my AMP at Harvard, and then. Yeah, I'm actually studying quite a lot of things. I'm a quants person. I love numbers, and I write. I'm very big on spirituality.
Yes.
Yeah, my relationship with God is very cardinal. I'm who I am today because of my relationship with God.
Love that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there isn't much about it. It's just that.
No, he doesn't want to toot his own horn, but we are so honored. He's actually quite a big deal. So, yes, tell me, why risk? It's not a very orthodox profession in Zambia, especially, at least not when I was growing up. It wasn't something that I looked to do. So why risk for you?
Okay, so I never really started out my career with an interest in risk. I was more driven by the perks. When you're younger, people talk about roles that pay them quite, that are very lucrative by then. So, yeah, I've been in banking this is my 19th year. Wow. And I've worked for two banks. I work for Zanaco right now, and I was born and bred in Standard Bank. Yeah, and I've done South Central Africa, I've done East Africa, and so I have quite extensive knowledge in African markets. I understand European markets as well. So why risk management? So I guess it's about destiny, You don't really get to choose. Look, they say you have to be very deliberate about what you want to be, but sometimes I think that God forces you in particular directions. So I think that everything that I have done, there is no risk type that I'm unfamiliar with. And little did I know that all the experience that I gathered in my 19 years was actually pushing me towards a risk management role. Do I regret being in risk management? No. The world has become chaotic right now, and traditionally we were called second line. Well, we're still called second line, and we were more like a support function. But the risk management role has changed and evolved. It's now more strategic because everyone in crafting strategy is looking for direction and clarity.
Yes.
So only when you're clear about where you're going, then can you craft your strategy. Can you navigate your strategy? There's quite a lot that's happening. I would say never a time in this world has there been like one where things are so interconnected, interrelated, symbiotic, and integrated at the same time. So you really have to understand the complexity, and that's the crust and the DNA of risk management.
Yes.
So risk management has evolved. We're not like the police. Previously, if a person was a risk manager and they walked into a room and everybody would be scampering and thinking maybe something has gone wrong. Okay. But now risk managers have a seat at the table.
Yes.
Where you can imagine during COVID-19, everyone was looking to, okay, where to next? Risk management is wide. Risk is in everything we do.
Yes.
Just like when a traffic light is red, you stop. Because the risk is that if you drive, you might cause an accident.
Indeed.
So I think that everyone is a risk manager, irrespective of whether you go by risk manager title or not. You always think risks. I mean, you're running a law firm here, and if you don't craft your contracts well, if you don't represent your clients very well, you might end up losing market share, and that's a risk in itself.
Indeed.
So Yeah. So I would say everything that I've done in my life has made me who I am today. And I keep learning, constant learning. So you'll be asking, thinking this guy is a risk practitioner and he understands risk management, but I'm always upskilling myself, because if you don't, you will become obsolete. You will become redundant.
Indeed.
And the risk of being extinct is very, very high. So you have risk managers that
even
are...
under personal capacity.
Yes. So you find that risk management now has a leg in data science, has a leg in law. We need to understand the law, has a leg in quants and technology as well. We're in an era of artificial intelligence, machine learning and all that. And if you don't use those kinds of technologies, then I don't know what kind of tools you are using to help you predict. And with such complexities, you definitely need enablers. So I think that's just a snippet of why risk management.
Risk management. I love it. And you did you did address what risk management is. So the next question I was going to ask was, I mean, you've given me a bit of a synopsis of what it entails, but what is risk management, like in the short definition, and what does it look like on a day-to-day as a risk practitioner?
Okay.
What do you do?
Okay. So I think risk is merely a chance. I'm not going to use technical jargon like probability, likelihood. It's just a chance that something could go wrong. Okay. But again, we look at both sides of the coin. Yes. So everybody thinks that risk management is about making losses. No, it's about preventing adverse outcomes from actualizing.
Yes.
So if you can have a crystal ball in your hands, which is practically impossible, you can't mitigate risk 100%, but you can reduce. And if you are conscious, then it helps you make risk-adjusted decisions. So for example, if I know that there are dogs in a particular yard, then I'll be very careful about how I approach getting into that yard.
Indeed.
So that's forward thinking. So risk management now is about forward thinking. You think ahead. What could go wrong? Can I play out a number of scenarios? And if you know those scenarios, then you're able to navigate and prepare for the worst.
Yes.
And basically that's just risk management. And because it's about chance, and chance in mathematics is probability. So what are the chances that if I toss a coin, I'll get heads or tails? It's 50-50. So if you know that chances are 50-50, then you're able to make decisions in that format. What was the next question you asked?
So what is like a day-to-day life of a risk officer?
All right. So interesting thing about being a risk officer is if you ever spoke to a risk officer that told you they have their day structured in a diary and then task A, task B, chances are that they're lying to you. It's chaotic. It's never structured. But above all, there has to be resilience. You need to be an adaptive leader.
Yes.
So anything that comes your way, you could come to the office and boom, or we have network intrusion attempts, which is a cyber potential attack. Or the central bank has just released this communication and the MPC just sat and interest rates have gone up, or the exchange rate is depreciating.
Yes.
So it just keeps you on your toes. And while all that is happening, you could get issues like operational in nature. There's a fraud that's happened.
Yes.
Or maybe the system is down. Or customers can't transact.
Yes.
Now, can you imagine all those things happening at the same time? And you have to keep your cool and calm and still operate and be as resilient and still, be able to address those issues. So that's an example of a typical day. And in addition to being operational, there are strategic issues that do come up. Maybe the board wants you to explain something.
Yes.
Or Muti, you need to go and give this presentation somewhere.
Yes.
Or you need to talk to your members of staff that are feeling a certain type of way as a leader. So I wear different hats. I wear hats as I am in the second line of defense, so I can be operational. I'm experienced, so I roll my sleeves and I join my team to address issues. But at the same time, I wear a different hat. In the C-suite, I'm first line because I'm the guy then that gives advisory services and say this is how we should proceed when these risks do actualize. So I say risk management is about strategic partnerships, advisory, and solutions. So gone are the days I'm going to say this door can't close and I'll do a report and say it's red, and I go to the board and say the door can't close and I keep the guess what? I would have failed in my duties. If the door can't close, I need to put a solution there and say, the door can't close. We need to fix this door and buy this door from XYZ, or else these risks will not be mitigated. Because at the end of the day, when you sit down and discuss strategy, you're trying to make money.
Yes.
So you can't always be a team. No. Can we do this deal? No. Why? It's risky. My job is to say it is risky. However, we can structure it differently to still make the same amount of money, but in this fashion, which is both compliant with regs and is within a framework that is airtight, and we're not going to lose money. Yes. That's now strategic thinking. So you as a risk officer, you're a strategic player. You're a technical and an expert, and at the same time, you engage people. One of the attributes of a risk officer is you need to be humble. If you're proud, you're not going to get any information from anyone. So you get to their level of thinking. You listen more. You listen to appreciate and not listen to respond. Because chances are that people usually are quick to responding because they think they have seen a particular outcome or situation. And by that, they're too quick to not listening. And if you don't listen, you might end up missing what the actual risk is. And then when you're rating your risks as well, risk management can be very emotional, right? Because you step on people's toes. If you go out there and rate their risks a certain type of way without communicating with them, then it looks like you are putting people on the spot, or like you're telling on them. So you have to sit down with them, let them appreciate your methodology. And then one of the biggest attributes of a risk officer is you should be able to demystify complex methods, or complexity must be demystified. So they say if you're able to explain to a 5-year-old what risk management is and any type of risk, then you would have mastered the art of communication. The biggest issue is communication. So if as a risk officer you can't break down complex concepts to the board, to the C-suite, to everyone in the organization, even as you do awareness, then chances are that you will not drive the right risk culture. People will not understand.
Indeed. Because I was going to say, bringing it back home is, I feel like risk is very similar to economics in how people's public sentiments of it. It seems like a very abstract thing. Like if there's going to be a drought, or there's conflict, what can you really do about it? Like they'll tell you this is a probability of this. And so people don't necessarily appreciate its tangible impact. So I was going to say, what do you think about Zambia's current risk culture? Do you think it's evolving and there's a better attitude towards it?
I think that the average Zambian has become more educated and they're asking the right questions. The average Zambian is now more expressive and they can talk. The average Zambian is taking keen interest in understanding things that affect them, from the time they elect leaders to holding them accountable, to understanding what really is driving the macros. For example, what's really driving the exchange rate, what's mining about, interest rates, why are they sort of high? Yes, I can say there's still latitude for them to understand even more, but we need more analysts as well. So more analysts will be able to break down complex and difficult concepts for the average person to then understand. I would say 10 years ago, we didn't have as many commentators. Either maybe people were scared to comment, or maybe company policy. People were afraid to comment because maybe, the company policy does not allow that. But the average citizen is able to question everything from the IMF deal to drought to load shedding, and to ask the most difficult questions and uncomfortable questions. And it's very, very good because it does help leaders to sit up and to be more accountable.
Indeed. Great. So my last general question before we get into the 2025 risk outlook is, I'm a lawyer, so why is risk important for the legal profession? What do you think are some important or some observations that you made in just dealing with legal practitioners? Do you think they have sufficient awareness? Are we doing enough in our drafting of contracts, advice?
Okay. To me, law falls under the auspices of legal risk. And legal risk in my world is an operational risk. Operational risk is people, processes, systems, and external events.
Yes.
So we do quite a lot in general. There's lending, there's contracting for third-party services, business relationships. To open, to get into a business deal, it definitely has to narrow down into legals.
Yes.
So why risk is important is because, first of all, the question is, why do people contract? People contract because they want to protect themselves from relationships going bad.
Yes.
If you're in business, one is getting a service and the other one is paying for it ultimately. So if the service that you have contracted for if there isn't the right specific performance, then it's an issue.
Indeed.
Okay? Yeah. So the answer to why legal practitioners need to understand risk management is the same answer as to why everyone must be interested in risk. We do business within an environment that's uncertain.
Yes.
It's the uncertainty that then gives rise to risk. Things could go wrong, or they could go good.
Yes.
That's risk. So you then decide to hedge yourself with a legal agreement.
Yes.
Okay? So trading, there's legal agreements. Lending, legal agreements. Any type of business that you should do. But ultimately, it's the risk-return trade-off that's important. So let's talk about risk and return.
Yes.
You've heard people say the higher the risk, the higher the return. But in small font, the higher the falls. Like if you're buying stocks, they will just tell you, warning, share prices could plummet due to market conditions and everything.
Yeah.
That's risk in itself. That's a legal document. So if you go and say, I bought this stock, but I didn't know, they will tell you, flip it and read. There's an exclusion clause. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I once, when I was doing my, business or company law, there was a guy who went to the beach and there was this seat he sat on. I can't remember the exact case. And then the seat flipped and broke his back. And then I think he sued and everything. And then the company came and said, there was an exclusion clause. But then was it Lord? Is it Denim or Denning? Said, no, if you have exclusion clauses, they must be clearly put where people can see them and not hidden in small fonts. Anyway, so you take risk, and because you've taken risk, you are compensated for that risk, and that's your return.
Yes.
So that's why you must be interested in risk, because if you're focused on a return and you're fixated on getting X%, like maybe I'm going to get 15% return, there's a risk component. You might not get 15%. So you have to be interested in what could go wrong. So anyone has a strategy. Any company has a strategy. But the question is, do you understand the environment you're working in? So let's assume this company is a law firm. And then what are the risks that you face? Yeah, you're dealing with legals, and then you got all your constitutional issues, those green things you put on your thing. But
the green money.
The reality of the matter is you use a system.
Yes.
You could be hacked. That's cybersecurity.
Yes.
So a lot of us think because you're a law firm, everything is legal. No. Within the legal, you're using a system. You could be hacked, isn't it? There's people risk. You could be working with someone who's leaking documents to another law firm. That's a problem. And then external events could happen. You could come into this building, there could be lightning, and then boom, you don't have a roof and everything. So you need to understand the risk you're dealing with. You can be contracting with a person who may not be ethically upright. You know what? So you need to understand the environment that you're operating. So I'm actually answering the question as to why you should be interested in risk management, because all this is risk. COVID does not spare whether you're a lawyer, a banker, or even a doctor who treats you for the same COVID. So pandemic risk is one of them. I was just talking to my guys and I said, there's so many floods in Lusaka. Not even a single cholera case. Maybe stats are not being reported, but that's risk. You know what I mean? You could have people that come and clean your tables. I mean, they're our helps. They help us. We think they're just cleaners. But guess what? They make sure that your table is clean. They make your coffee. They make your tea. But guess what? They could be coming from places that are cholera infested. and they could bring cholera into this building, which is in a modern space, and you're thinking, far-fetched, we wouldn't have cholera here. Or these same people can be cleaning, but because you don't lock your documents, which is information risk, they could be leaking documents, and before we know it, your documents are on Watchdog.
Yes.
And that's how things leak. So we need to understand and get granular and really do an assessment. I expect any business in this country or in the world to at least have a risk assessment. What could go wrong? Power does not spare you guys. It also goes. So you're thinking of backup, which is now resilience.
Yes.
You need backup. Are you going to use solar?
Yes.
How often do people work from home? XYZ. That's why you must understand risk management. Or else, without this, there could be disruption.
Indeed. And clients don't care about your
Exactly.
excuses.
No, they don't.
Yes.
You just have to deliver. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That was so helpful. So moving into the crux of why we're here.
Okay.
So I wanted us to look at the 2025 risk outlook from a macroeconomic perspective. Firstly, we look at the monetary policy risks as well, and then we can move into geopolitics.
Okay.
Yeah. So starting with macroeconomic monetary policy for Zambia, what do you think are the biggest risk factors business people should consider this year?
Okay. First things first. You're coming from a drought, 2024.
Yes.
Drought effects will still trickle into this year. There's what we call lagged effects. There's certain businesses that will not bear the brunt of drought as and when it happens, but later on. We went to visit a certain client, I won't mention the name, confidentiality, and we asked them, what's the impact of the drought? They said, no impact. I said, how? They said, this drought, it came when our crop was already ready.
Yeah.
And then we are in a harvest mode, and then they were drying their crop.
Yes.
But we will feel the impact next year, because the time they planted the other crop is when the drought hit them. But that drought will not appear in their numbers.
Yes.
That's number one. The second point of call is drought does transmit credit risks. So, for example, your farmers as well. So, when it's dry, grazing land is affected, beef can't feed properly, it affects the gestation period of cattle. And over 3 years, you hear people saying, you know what, the price of beef has gone up. Why?
Yes.
Because of the drought. And you're thinking, but there's a mismatch. We're talking about prices going up in a period when it's raining. So, first point of call is drought-induced energy generation issues. We know that the Kariba is only at 6% usable capacity. So no matter how it rains this year, it's not enough to fill the Kariba, not even to get it to half.
Hectic.
So power generation is one. Any business is interested in power generation, right? That's one. So I think the best case scenario, listening to the ZESCO MD, was that we could get to 12 hours of power, like availability, and 12 hours of load shedding, which is a positive. Best case scenario.
Jesus.
But if there's a best case, there's also a worst case. Worst case could be people are having power between 3 hours to 5 hours, like coming from midnight to 5 a.m. and what. So what I'm trying to say is energy issues will still be there. They're not going anywhere this year. We'll have them, but they will not be as bad as they were last year. The second point of call would be agribusiness. Like I mentioned, there are some value chains that will still be bearing the brunt of 2024 drought. And so effects will still be moderated. It's a good thing that it's been raining consistently, but rain as well, flash floods do have negative impact on crops. So you could have planted crops, but because of flash floods, output destroyed. So there has to be a balance there. So one of them is your climate-induced effects on power generation and on agribusiness. And agribusiness also includes not only growing crops, but livestock.
Yes.
And then when it rains as well, disease is very eminent. Foot and mouth, bovine pleuropneumonia, swine, fever for pigs and all. And those are diseases that always hit us year in, year out. So that's number one. The second point of call, as all this is happening, it then forces the state to start intervening to cushion some of the drought effects. And because of that, it then exacerbates the sovereign posture. And that's the second risk, which is your fiscal posture.
Yes.
So when I talk about fiscal posture, we are still rated high.
Yeah.
We're at high risk of debt, distress, and default. We just restructured our debt. We didn't pay it. We just restructured. And we need to start paying. Last year, I think Zambia paid about north of $380 million just on servicing interest and payments on the dollar bonds, just on the dollar bonds. This year, it's $599 million debt service. So I want you to look at debt service this way.
Yes.
Imagine paying someone $600 million, or think about what you could have used the $600 million for. Okay, so already there's a resource issue, and that's why probably when governments are hamstrung for resources, you start to see tax bases widen. Small tax coming up, advanced income tax, withholding tax, property transfer tax. The government is not a business. So tax is one of the ways government raises revenues. And it's forced me to go into tax because now I'm already stepping into regulatory risk, because tax obviously ZRA is a regulatory authority. So when your taxes start to be increased, of course there are people that don't pay tax, maybe they could be evading tax, and they've realized that maybe with technology we can widen the net and collect more. So the interesting thing is when you collect taxes, you have a budget to fund. The pronouncement was that the budget, 80.3% will come from domestic, it will be domestically funded, okay? This is where the risk is. If you don't manage to collect in taxes, you know where the money will come from? You go and put stress on the money markets, bonds, bills, and that pushes the yield curve up, and that's why interest rates are elevated, which now takes me to interest rate risk. So it's one risk to look out for, especially with what has happened in the global environment. Those pronouncements around let's cut aid, let's reduce. You see, if the US does cut aid, 60% of the Ministry of Health budget is funded from US aid sources, right? So if aid is frozen, it means that Parliament, when they open, should be debating on where the money will come from. So the question is, where will it come from? And then you can't choke businesses by increasing taxes because you're going to make them shrink. Okay, so it then puts pressure on your money markets. In fact, that should be my next article, to say what would the post 90-day look like when it becomes very clear as to how. So there's so we've talked about regulatory risk. We've talked about sovereign posture. Sovereign posture as well. Debt restructure needs to complete. There's 1.8 billion pending. Why is it very important? Somebody used to call me Mr. Debt Restructure because I always used to talk about debt restructure, singing about it. It's because if you don't finish restructuring your debt, Standards and Poor's, Fitch and Moody's are not going to upgrade your credit rating. So why is the credit rating important for Zambia? It determines the cost at which Zambia or any entity from Zambia borrows. So you can want to get cheap money abroad. You've heard people say, oh, banks in Switzerland, banks in London, interest rates are high, low. Interest rates are low, but you know what the conversation is? If a Botswana and a Zambia go to the same entity or want to raise money in the international capital market, the first question will be, what's your credit rating? Default, then the premiums are going to be very high. And then you will get money at a punitive rate. And this getting money at a punitive rate is what is penalizing the private sector because they're not able to get money at affordable rates. Ask any business, interest rate is a problem. Then on top of that, we're still grappling with $1 demand is up. We need dollars to pay debt. You don't pay debt in kwacha.
No.
You borrowed in dollars, you have to
must
pay back in dollars. So you can imagine any dollars that are coming into the country are being held by the Bank of Zambia, at least to keep reserves for a rainy day and say, when that debt is due, we need those dollars. So we need dollars for fuel. We don't have oil in Zambia, so we have to pay for fuel in dollars. At the same time, we are net importers. You tell me the last time you ever bought anything from here. I'm just being honest. We're all shopping. We're buying these iPhones from the US and whatnot. We're buying tickets online. What currency do you think we use? We use dollar. So you can imagine if you put all that demand at aggregate, technically speaking, it is not enough to just wait for dollars coming from mining. What about other sectors such as agri? We are a country that is endowed with arable land, and we have water bodies and rivers. But contribution to GDP from agri, 3.5%. That's an anomaly. And that's why you've seen the government step in to say they're going to go aggressive, value addition, make sure it's lucrative for the small scale farmer to want to double their output because we've got so much potential that we have not tapped.
Yes.
The other risks would be, so because of drought, other risks start manifesting in inflation. You see, your inflation is 16.7%.
Yes.
What is driving inflation? There's food inflation and there's non-food inflation. Let's talk about food inflation. Because of drought, these floods I'm talking about that would damage your crops, they cause scarcity, start pushing prices up. Fertilizer is expensive because of the next point that you asked me, your geopolitics.
Yes.
When Russia and Ukraine started fighting, Russia is the largest producer of potash, and potash is a component that goes into the manufacture of fertilizer.
Yes.
And then your supply chains are constrained. So because of that, your prices go up. If fertilizer prices go up, it means that that cost is then passed to end users, and farmers are bearing the brand, and they will sell their crops at a higher price. So you find that your food prices are high. The other component would be non-food. Let's talk about non-food. So on your non-food, you have things like your exchange rate depreciation. So because your supply is there and your demand is there, so to cause a balance, your exchange rate needs to depreciate.
Yes.
I always tell people, why do you always talk about, do you really understand what is driving currency depreciation? Look at the exchange rate as a barometric indicator. When you go to the doctor and they check your temperature and it's 38 degrees, you don't whine about the temperature is 38 degrees. The next question you ask is, why is my temperature 38 degrees? The barometer is telling me something about the structure of my body.
Yes.
Let's now go to the exchange rate.
Yes.
If my exchange rate is pushing up and getting closer to 30, there is something that variable is telling you. It's telling you that your demand is too much. Your supply is constrained.
Yes.
You are not producing much to export, and that's why you're not getting dollars. What will you do to push your supply up? This is a chronic problem we've had since 1964.
Indeed.
Tell me, apart from copper, if we stripped out mining, what else will we do? We're excited about mining. The Indawa is coming up. Why we're excited about mining is that when your mining thrives, then downstream business thrives. You will now have suppliers. Remember, people would be supplying to the mines. Everyone wanted to be a supplier. You will supply from gloves to sulfuric acid to food to real estate to fuel to electricity. Yes. So that's an anchor sector. But what we are saying is when the price of copper collapses, then you are exposed.
Indeed.
Right now, it's looking great because the world is decarbonizing, talking about electric cars. An electric car uses about 80 kilograms of copper. The world is in a state of war. No one talks about it. But copper is used to manufacture bullets. So you can see that there's a lot that's driving the copper price up. There's a copper deficit right now in the world. And at the same time, there's a lot that's happening in Asia, such as your warehouse capacity is increasing. And that is what is giving copper. Yes. So I think we've talked about a lot of risks. I probably just was trying to bring out how interconnected sort of everything is. But that's what business people should then look out for. They should look out for those items of issue that I've put in. Then you talked about geopolitics. What is geopolitics? Geo is geographical, an area, then the political aspect to it. So geopolitics takes the form of different shapes and forms. People want to annex each other, like Russia and Ukraine. It's about land, and one wants to take over a piece of land. It's turned into war. Sometimes geopolitics can be really, really driven by things like your trade differences. So yes, we call it a trade war, but it's got a geo aspect to it. You've got China and you've got the US. They're fighting because of this one slaps tariffs on the other. This one retaliates. We've got a Donald Trump sitting as president of the United States right now, and he's threatened tariffs. He hasn't touched China. Why? Because whatever he ramped on China when he was president in his first term is still holding. But he ordered a review. So if there's a review, he's saying, what else can we do? Already you are seeing fights about ChatGPT versus that DeepSeek. And then the Americans are saying, no, DeepSeek stole their data and went and, So all that causes tension. And when there is tension like that, it then affects the environment and the cost of doing business. You've got an Apple, which is a US company, but it's got its factory in China. things like that, and each one of them now is thinking of making their countries great. So geopolitics is very interesting because when nations are in that state of tension, I think the first point of call is, what are they major producers of? So let's talk about Russia and Ukraine. Because of Russia and Ukraine, your potash prices went up. As a result, fertilizer prices, the entire world bore the brunt.
Yes.
Russia is the second largest producer of crude.
Yes.
So anything that you do to Russia definitely affects crude prices.
Yes.
And Russia is a member of the OPEC Plus. So when they're making those decisions, they push the lever, and then it starts to manifest in your commodity markets. Supply chains. When Israel and Hamas were fighting, there was these Houthi rebels that cropped up, and they went and started attacking. Was it in the Red Sea or in the Dead Sea?
Yes.
And then they blocked that small stretch that accounted for 12% of global trade. And because of that, if you ordered a laptop, they would tell you, this laptop takes 2 weeks, but this time it's going to take 6 weeks.
Oh.
I remember ordering things that would take very, very long, and those are now your chains. It becomes expensive. So instead of cutting a shortcut and passing through the Red Sea, they now needed to reroute all the way to Cape Town, and and then it increases the cost. And that's why they say supply chains are inflationary. So you must be interested in geopolitics, because for us in Zambia, geopolitics hits our fuel tanks.
Yes.
So a rocket can be fired between Iran and Israel, but it ends up hitting my fuel tank because ultimately I'm a price taker.
Yes.
I don't have oil in my backyard. I have to pay I'm a price taker.
Yes.
So if oil today is $110 a barrel, that's what I have to pay. There's nothing I can do. So you can see that geopolitics manifests in fertilizer prices. Geopolitics, we're seeing it in commodity. You see, we live in an era where all these risks we are talking about, you can actually see them on the balance sheet.
Yes.
You can see climate change on the balance sheet, because what you're calling power issues is climate change related. So that's the complexity. And there is no way you can monitor global risks in isolation of domestic. Everything is intertwined. Unless you are an island and you do everything within a closed environment. So I always look at exogenous and endogenous factors.
Yes.
And these are things that you need to understand. If you're running a global business, you need to be switched on to what's happening. You need to be interested in what's happening in the news. And part of the job of a risk officer now is what gives you competitive edge is when you take keen interest in understanding how these risks are interrelated. Because if you present this to a business panel that's about to craft strategy, then they will know how to navigate. Yes. So I don't know of any company that is making or crafting strategy without understanding their risks. Then I don't know what they're doing.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we're getting to 2026. We're in 2025.
Yes.
There's an election year. There's what we call political risk factors.
Yes.
Election years come with their own issues. There's pressure to address issues. So we've got climate change issues. We've got power issues and all those. And if they're not managed well, I don't need to finish this statement. If they're not managed well, then the citizens start to feel a certain type of way. It's as though they blame you for causing those climate issues. But the argument is wider. And that's why I think part of the strategy, even at national level, should be, how do we build resilience? You know what I mean? Look at nations like South Africa. We used to laugh at people when we were in Sandton and they had geysers on top of their roofs, and we're thinking, what's that? Yes. But those geysers, South Africa has 5,400 megawatts capacity of solar energy, which can absorb our power deficit. So there's a shift to move the retail market off the grid, and they get onto renewable energy such as solar. And then there's also very interesting dynamics. Have you noticed that 85% of our power is hydro-generated? But guess what? It's concentrated in the southern part of Zambia. And the southern part of Zambia is the one that's hit the most by drought. Go to Luapula, go to Kalumbila. It never stopped raining. But power stations, we don't have. And this is when there are discussions around, we've got a lot of power projects in the pipeline. How do we finish them? The biggest challenge has been financing. So the financing aspect also is, have you ever wondered why? Right now, I love it when people ask me and say, why aren't commercial banks just going to pay off and meet all those financing requirements.
Yes.
It's because your energy projects are long-term in nature. It takes 7 to maybe 13 to 15 years to finish a proper project. But your depositor base as a commercial bank is short-term. Because remember, when you come to the bank and you bring your money and you're saving, it is your money I get and I go and lend to someone else. But I should be able to structure in such a way that these are demand deposits. Tomorrow you're going to come and say, that 10 million I put, I want to draw it. But I can't come back to you and say, I'm sorry, I can't give it to you because I lent it to somebody who's doing a power project. So this is now creating those opportunities where we need development banks. Number one, we need capital markets to be developed because we need to raise financing. The cake is big. We need pension funds to also take risk and contribute in doing that. We need insurance companies to come. They should just not focus on motor vehicle insurance and collect premiums from people who never even have accidents. It's time to now think big. And that's why you've seen the PIA move in and say, you need to capitalize more. You need to start being a part of the financial markets, because financial markets are wide. It's just not commercial banks. So I know that's been a mouthful, but
so intriguing. Enjoyed every second of it. And okay, so we've discussed that, and you spoke about building resilience. So from a macroeconomic monetary, how do I as a business build resilience for those type of risks? Because I'm very risk averse. I'm like also not very entrepreneurial. So if I'm sitting as a business person and I'm thinking, how do I plan strategy? How do I build it? Because I'll be feeling like nothing I can do. The inflation rate is going to go up. Nothing I can do.
That's a very general question. I remember in November, I was on a panel in London at Risk Minds. And I was giving them a demonstration of resilience coming from an emerging market. Because sometimes we sit on these panels and we've got people that are talking about things that, okay, I'm telling them, great, I understand. Come to Africa. These are the types of risks we are dealing with. And by the time we finished the conversation, I said, you know what? I think of all the risk officers we have here, you're the one that's managing real risk. So how do you build resilience? Resilience is at various levels. So first of all, let's talk about technical resilience. You use a system. I'd be shocked if a company was using a system and they did not even have any sort of cybersecurity protection. Because tomorrow if you're hacked, what will happen? How are you managing your cybersecurity? Cybersecurity requires that you invest. It's not cheap. It doesn't come cheap. And if you think cheap is expensive, then try an accident. That's when you know. So cyber budgets are big, but the returns are very high. How we measure returns is that we just don't look at, we look at what are the risks of not getting cyber protection, not only from an insurance perspective, but by having software that would detect that somebody is trying to intrude and the like. Okay, you could be hacked, you lose your information, you lose your clientele base. So what is your risk appetite? We call it risk appetite. So that is risk appetite. It's like when a baby is growing, the same amount of milk they would drink, they have appetite for. That's why you get a small feeding bottle. But as you grow, whatever they start to eat changes. That's an example of risk appetite. So how much are you willing to lose is what your risk appetite is. So cyber is one of them. Let's talk about operational resilience. Operational resilience has power at the center of it all. So if power goes and then you provide a service to your clients, which requires that, let's say you're a manufacturer. Without power, you're not going to manufacture anything. Have you invested in a genset? Do you have solar power? This, if you don't have this, you're not going to have resilience. It's a problem. Right now, the two biggest resiliences are operational and cyber resilience. Resilience can also be from a strategic perspective. Is your strategy risk-proof? Okay? Is your strategy risk-proof? This is what we do in a bank. We call it stress testing. We go for the worst possible scenario and say, if it hit us, would we still be operating tomorrow? Then we determine how much capital we need to hold. That is now balance sheet resilience. If today customers just started getting their deposits, would I still be able to operate? Or would I be thinking, sorry, we ran out of money in the ATM and we apologize? That's another issue. So your strategy is actually the apex of all these, your vendors. Are you over dependent on one vendor? And if that vendor was not there, So we actually have conversations such as your third-party risk.
Yes.
Like, yes, I can have a vendor that's giving me, maybe say, data. But the question is, I need to diversify.
Yes.
If it's liquid, if it's Starlink, if it's Zamtel, if it's MTN. When Zamtel or MTN is down, I can. Now imagine if you were leaning on one vendor, then you're screwed.
Yes.
So that is resilience in itself. Are you adequately capitalized to the extent that when you are shocked, you still have something in your back pocket to allow you to recover? That is resilience. Okay. So I think from a legal perspective, the kind of resilience I can look at it from a human capital perspective. Yes, you're a law firm. Businesses are evolving. Are you moving with the trends? Do you understand those businesses? Yes, you understand the law, but what's your business acumen? You know, I always tell my team, you can't be a risk manager for a business you don't understand. Then it's just academic.
Indeed.
So do you spend time with the business? So we spend time with the business. We sit down with them. What has changed in this business? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, great. Can we do a risk assessment? Oh, great. What else should we look at? What else could go wrong? What is best practice? So the legal field as well needs to start understanding those things. So it's look, let me teach you a tactic. I'm a risk person, but I try by all means in my statements, in my write-ups, not to use the word risk. Because I'm sharpening my communication. Okay. I try to just break it down and make it very, very simple. Yes. So that's how you build resilience. Okay. And you need to have things like a backup plan. If things go wrong, you need to have a call tree. Who will you call? What's your backup plan? Can you work from home? That's all resilience. So what is your business continuity management plan? Do you have that? It has to be documented, and it's a living document. It needs to change. The world woke up to COVID-19. People were working from home. I think before adjustments could take place, it was very, very difficult. But now people have backup plans. If something happens to this building, boom, you just get your machines. Your stuff is in the cloud. You move, you're home, you continue. Your clients would not even have known what happened. Exactly. So resilience is what, like I said, I would go on speaking about resilience. But if you're running a trade, if it's about trade, understanding supply chains, I think it becomes very important to understand what are the taxes you're paying, what are the regulations or legislations that are coming up. And what we do is when legislation comes up, you need to have a team that would digest to understand and always look at how does it impact your business. In the absence of that, you will wither away as a business. So there's quite a lot that is required. And that's why I think that where we are going, you need to have teams that are versatile, teams that are diverse. You just can't have, yes, it's lawyers, but you just can't go and have lawyers. Have lawyers. IT people, have data scientists. There are people who need to flesh out graphs for you and all that. So you can't be a jack of all trades and you know what. So I think at the end of the day, you need to embrace there's a lot that happens in the accounting space. So you need various expertise on a team to make sure that you're able to demonstrate the level of resilience that you need. So it's very very imagine how resilience has changed. One moment there's Joe Biden, he's got his own policies. The next moment you hear day one, somebody has already signed 78 executive orders, and that's disruptive in itself. But how do you build resilience? Look at what has hit us. No one ever thought that aid was gonna go. And more is coming. And there will be disruption. So the question is, are you being disrupted and extinct? Or are you being disrupted but thinking of ways in which, even if this comes, okay, we invoke this continuity plan, as we are okay, we can continue operating. That's what resilience is.
I see. So moving away, I mean, you've tackled a lot. You've tackled both the macro and geopolitical. So now I wanted to move on to the regulatory risk area. So I'm going to focus particularly on de-dollarization because I think that's something that everyone's intrigued by. We'll be talking about it. We're anticipating it coming. What does that look like for people in the bank financial sector, people looking to invest, people that have already lent? You know, I don't want to lend in dollars and then from now I have to start receiving payback in kwacha. I don't want kwachas.
De-dollarization is a very sensitive topic. I love to talk about it. I'm one of the few that has supported de-dollarization. Let me give you background. When this discussion of de-dollarization came, the thinking in the minds of the regulators was that your currency keeps running away.
Indeed.
There is a problem. Something needs to be done. When you have a problem, get into the habit of not going for one solution. Think of what you can do in the immediate, the intermediate, and in the long term.
Yes.
Clearly, production is low.
Yes.
We don't export much. Are you going to wake up and set up an industry tomorrow and start exporting? No. That's long term.
Yes.
Great. So now, let me digress a little bit.
Sure.
The biggest mistake we make, most analysts in Zambia, proxy growth for currency stability.
Yes.
When the currency is stable, people start clapping saying, yeah, the economy is doing well. Wrong. For a country that is a net importer, growth means depreciation pressure. Because for us, growth means we're going to bring in equipment and machinery.
Yes.
What do you use to pay for that equipment and machinery? Dollars. So it means your dollar demand is going up. So for a net importer, growth means depreciation pressure because demand has gone up.
Yes.
So I'm sure I've clarified that. So when you start seeing depreciation pressure, one of the issues is that someone needs dollars to do something to bring in capital equipment, to make payments, including debt as well. So now getting back to the question, what was in the regulator's mind? Currency was depreciating and running away at a fast pace. They tightened monetary policy, nothing. They tried to hike the statutory reserve ratio. There was a bit of sanity, but you could still see that it's pushed up and is now getting to 28, 27. Okay? So then we realized, oh my God, there's been so much insatiable appetite for dollars. When the world demands dollars, it's also a sign that they want to hedge themselves from uncertainty. So when you see people buying gold and dollars, then you are in an uncertain environment. I mean, a simple question is, if I asked you, say, I wanted to give you money, can I give you dollars or kwacha?
Of course, you're taking the
dollars. Exactly. Yes. And then this dynamic is such that it favors those who get paid in dollars.
Yes.
So if you're a person who earns in dollars, you will definitely be very, very vocal.
Yes.
When it comes, no, we don't want de-dollarization. Leave it.
Yes.
Because we will cause disruption for you.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, the authorities will cause disruption for you.
Indeed.
So I'll give you an example. If I was running a shopping mall and people were paying rent in dollars.
Yes.
Okay? De-dollarization would be a topic that would interest you.
Yes.
And you would be against it, isn't it? Imagine if it's one person who owns a mall.
Yes.
If that mall has 26 shops, and those 26 shops are being run by average Zambians, and each one of them is selling goods in kwacha. They are selling in kwacha, but you want them to pay you in dollars. Who the government will be more concerned about? 266 Zambians? Or one person who is getting dollar payments? So that's where I'm coming from.
Yes.
So the issue was the thinking was that there could be some moderation to some degree if they curbed dollar demand.
Yes.
Because dollar demand was causing currency depreciation. Then people said no. In 20 whatever, back then, we tried this. It didn't work well. It was reversed.
Yes.
How's it going to be different now? You know what the central bank has done?
No.
They asked everyone that runs a business and feels it's going to impact them negatively, put in a paper to explain to us. So even as it's going to be implemented, it will be implemented with exemptions for some key businesses.
Yes.
But I thought I should give you a simple example of what was going on in the minds of the regulators when they thought about it. So do you think that they will say, can we make a decision in the best interest of one person who they deem already comfortable because they're able to own this piece of property? Or will they think of the average Zambian? Because guess who's bearing the brunt of this? Cost of living pressure has been due to, before we talked about the drought, it was FX and it was currency depreciation.
Yes.
Because of currency depreciation, there was speculation and there was a whole lot of issues that then manifested in rising selling prices.
Yes.
And that is inflation. So with that in mind, I have given you an idea of the thinking in the minds of the central bank. And guess what? The governor himself said it's coming.
Yes.
And in the first quarter of 2025, how it's going to be executed is what all of us are waiting to see. It's definitely going to have implications on the FX market.
Yes.
Whether there will be, there's those immediate reactions and then it settles in, or it's going to cause chaos, we're waiting to see. But there is risk there because people will react in a certain way. So it's something that is on the cards. I think it's one of my top risks. I put it on my slides and it's a wait and see. But it will definitely impact people, but there will be exemptions. And I think one of the sectors that will be exempted, I can, on top of my head, from experience, will be the mines, because the mines already pay taxes in dollars directly, because those dollars are very handy. You've got debt service and you pay for it in dollars, But for these other sectors, not very much, very sure, But once it's implemented, there will have to be compliance. Compliance can be expensive. Complying is expensive. For example, today they would say cybersecurity regulation, we need to have a local cloud. So local cloud means you all have to ramp up your investments in your IT infrastructure and you pay money. And if you don't comply, you risk losing your license.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So my next question is centered. We both don't really enjoy climate change, so we'll just keep it brief.
Okay, that's fine.
So yes, climate change. What should we be expecting? I mean, we've got rain now, at least.
It's rained. Drought effects will be moderated. I think the bigger climate discussion is the adaptability, adopting regulation. There's quite a lot happening in the space. People are issuing climate bonds and all that. There seems to be this notion that these bonds are cheaper than your traditional bonds. I think we've only seen one bond so far in this market that was issued by CEC. Could there be more players? Yes. There's quite some significant representation when these COP24s come. There are international players that don't believe in climate change. But I think the reality of the matter is the nations that are at the center of driving pollution and have contributed to polluting the environment, we know them. They are the ones that are the most industrialized. Somebody once joked with me, and I was going to be on a panel, and I asked them, and I said, I'd like to pick your brain. And they said, please tell them that you only grew a conscience after you expanded your economies after using carbon, and then you want to tell us to stop using coal. It's a very interesting topic because much of some of the power generation projects that African nations are taking are in coal. Because right now, I tell you, Zambia has 1,500 megawatts of projects in coal that are coming up. Mamba is there's Mamba at 300 megawatts. There's Sunshare and the wonderful group are doing 600 megawatts each to be ready by 2027 as well. So you can see that because we're going through this climate patch, coal is an alternative. Okay, coal is an alternative. And most players have proved that there is technology that even if you use coal, you will not get to pollute the environment as significantly as so there's still green sort of technology. Look at what happened in Europe when Russia and Ukraine were fighting and it was winter and Russia needed to punish Europe. They cut supply of gas and guess what? Those coal plants were switched on in Europe. So there's guys are saying if your coal plants were switched on, why would you have a problem with me? So there's quite a lot happening there. There's pledges that have been made. The question is, will they really actualize? And there's this discussion on carbon credits. I'm not an expert on carbon credits.
I'm gonna ask.
Nations that are so green are benefiting from these carbon credits, but it's really in its infancy here in Zambia. And but with changes in policy in the US where Trump is allowing people to drill more, when you drill more, you're drilling fossil fuel.
Yes.
And then he's, scrapped off the exemptions on electric cars, meaning electric cars should now compete with fossil fuels.
Yes.
So it looks like it's going back on it's taking decarbonization steps backwards.
Yes.
So I guess he still believes it's a hoax.
Yes.
So interesting space. We're seeing more financial institutions taking up E&S within their spaces for credit evaluation. And a lot of people are also doing it. It's replacing CSR. If you look at an annual report, they will tell you, these are the initiatives we did.
Yes.
And I just pray that there isn't too much greenwashing, because there's a greenwashing aspect. So you can easily get an annual report and paint it green, and people will think you're doing that. So it's a new field. Yeah.
Enough. We'll just wait. Let's discuss a specific sector. I don't know. I've got here tabled energy, mining, agriculture. Just some advice to people in this sector. What would you say are the pertinent things you need to be looking at in having strategic risk policies for the year?
I think energy is straightforward. Everything that has happened in the sector in 2024 should interest everyone.
Yes.
The major reforms. It took a drought to see reforms inked. This conversation started as far back as the 80s. No one took investment in energy seriously.
No.
You've got net metering, you got open access, your licensing has improved. It now takes 48 hours to get a license. It used to take 90 days. Yeah. Quite shocking that something that used to take 90 days now takes 48 hours. I'd do an audit to understand what was going on, what people were actually being paid for.
Yes.
For me, the biggest reform that has ever happened in Zambia, it's still happening, is adjustment of tariffs. It's very controversial. Yes. I don't like to pay high tariffs because it's inflationary. But do you know that we have the lowest tariffs in Africa? And because of that, it has hampered the flow of investment in the energy sector. No one wants to come and do business in Zambia. It just doesn't make sense.
No.
So the adjustment of the cost of service study. So any business should understand the energy reform process and the tariff increases. So I think the biggest thing is not to increase tariffs to be able to import power. No. It's just that ZESCO was in a very tight spot and they needed to fund.
Yes.
But for me, the biggest item of issue is to get cost-reflective tariffs in the immediate, and then in the long term, your rates then eventually come down. So in the power sector, I think it's very, very important. In the mining sector, I think it's going to really be about building key relationships, because you could be in the mining sector. Energy is also an issue.
Yes.
Without energy, you can't mine, and you can't mine using solar. No, it's base load.
No.
Regulation. Yes. There's quite a lot that's happening.
Yes.
And markets are going to be very key. There's quite a lot happening in the mining sector, especially with transportation. Very soon, it's going to be a thing of the past to put your cathodes on a black truck that goes all the way to Durban.
Yes.
But you can just get them and put them on a rail train that could either go to the west, Lobito, or go to the east, Dar es Salaam.
Yes.
Okay. And I think what is also going to be very key is understanding what's happening in the private sector space to create capacity for value addition, because it's not just about exporting, but now how can people build value?
Yes.
How can people emulate the likes of Zamefa, of Newcam, to increase capacity and be able to export and get even more 4 times.
Yes.
That's very critical. There's talks of car battery factory setup within Zambia, and those components. I know someone asked me a very interesting question and say, why would somebody buy a battery from Zambia and ship it to Daimler Chrysler in Europe for use? But I said, no, think of it intelligently. What if Daimler Chrysler came and set up a plant closer to where the minerals are and manufacture the battery from here, or go 60% and go and finish up in their country.
Yes.
But then it creates value. We need to start understanding that it's not really about ownership. I think we waste so much time whining about ownership when we haven't yet mastered the technology and the know-how on how to manufacture. Yeah, exactly. Someone once asked me, and he told me, go to Dubai. Those hotels you see there, who do you think owns them? And I said, foreigners. They said, yes. And they also create employment to foreigners. But they have those laws that allow for that money to be kept within that ecosystem. And that's how we need to start thinking of this. And then eventually we can start to build capacity. And then we can then be self-reliant. Yes. What was the other sector you asked me? You asked me about mining. You asked me about...
It was agriculture.
Or agribusiness. I think for agriculture, there's a lot of talk around smart agric, the use of technology in agribusiness, precision farming. I was explaining to someone and I said, do you know what precision farming is? I said, you get an injection. You know the exact amount of ammonium nitrate you're putting in. You know the seeds you are planting. You don't get to waste fertilizer. You know how much drip irrigation to use so that you don't waste water. And then you're able to manage and monitor your yield, which is calculated. That's precision farming. And that's what the world is getting to, you know, and building the right infrastructure to support agric. Where we don't do so well is commodity trading is not really supported by a fully functional Zamaki. Ideally, you can't have briefcase businessmen going to villages and duping small-scale farmers that produce 93% of the maize and buying from them at just slightly above FRA and just give them an extra 50 kwacha and then taking that maize to DRC and going to sell it at 6 times the price. That's daylight robbery. But if we have a well-functioning commodity infrastructure, it would help with the trading is happening on one end, price discovery is happening, so the same prices that those people in DRC are seeing should be seen at the commodity exchange so that their lives can change. And at the same time, building storage capacity in every district where a farmer, I don't need to worry about getting my maize on a lorry and getting it to Lusaka when I'm in Porokoso. Why don't I take it to a barn in Porokoso and they give me a warehouse receipt? And if I can develop my financial markets, I can then use that warehouse receipt the same way you use a certificate of title if you want to get money from the bank and get a loan. We need to get to that point. That's what's happening in South Africa on the JSE, and that's what commodity trading is. And when we build all those supporting structures on commodity trading, it then builds confidence, and then you can have a flow of resources and funds that make growth a possibility. That's what deepening your markets would be. Then you can have more players. Those that grow maize, those that grow coffee can bring their crops there.
Brilliant.
That's sort of the architecture that we need. That's what we should be getting to.
Appreciate all your insights. This has been such a delight. Thank you so much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Mutisunge Zulu, Chief Risk Officer for Zanaco. It has been such a treat. Hope you enjoyed our first episode. Thank you very much.
Thanks for hosting me. It was an insightful discussion.
Yes,
Thank you.
Enjoyed it very much.
Pleasure.
Yes.